Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Goodness. I wanted to ask you this. Have you heard about the participation of Sri Lankans in Russian and Ukraine war? But really? Sri Lankans in Russian and Ukraine war? Yes, but this is not the first time foreign fighters are seen in conflict zones. There are military-trained individuals who get involved in the national and international conflicts. They do not belong to either side of the armed forces. So who are they? Hold on to that thought. According to the Geneva Conventions, under that the international humanitarian law defines them in such a way: be specifically recruited locally or abroad in order to fight in an armed conflict, take a direct part in the hostilities, be motivated to take part in the hostilities essentially by the desire for private gain, and to be promised by, on behalf of the party of the conflict, material and compensation substantially in excess of the promised or paid to combatants of similar ranks and functions in the armed forces of the party. Not be a national of a party to the conflict or a resident of territory controlled by a party to the conflict. Not be a member of the armed forces of a party to the conflict, and not have been sent by a state which is not a party to the conflict on official duty as a member of its armed forces. So this is the definition that's been given under the international humanitarian law in the Geneva Conventions. So who are they? They are the mercenaries. More on these mercenaries, so let's look at what the Oxford Dictionary say on mercenaries. A professional soldier serving a foreign power. So, would you believe it or not, it's the world's second oldest profession. It's been in the history of war since its beginnings. So, use of mercenaries in a war, let's have a look at this. From the 12th century through private security companies in the 21st century, the use of mercenaries continues. Mercenary activity in the medieval period through the mercenary involvements in the wars surrounding African decolonization ending in the early 70s. So use of mercenaries in war. Let's have a look at some history. From the 12th century through private security companies in 21st century, the use of mercenaries continues. Mercenary activity from the medieval period through to the mercenary involvement in the wars surrounding African decolonization ending in 1970s. Medieval mercenaries in the European armies linking the use of foreign fighters to the development of absolute monarchy. The use of private enterprises to fight wars throughout the early modern Europe, including the 30 Years' War, arguing that the use of state-recruited and state-administered militaries is anomalous in the European history. When Alexander invaded Asia in 300 BC, his army included 5,000 mercenaries, and the Persian army who faced him had 10,000 Greeks in it. Heard about the Fighting Tigers? A small group of Americans, aviators, fought in the first battle in the World War II. They were mercenaries hired by China to fight against Japan. So, why choose to be a mercenary? Here's the interesting part. If someone wants a change in scenery or would like to change to show their skills in combat, they would take up this option. Military or security or paramilitary unemployment, which happens quite a bit as well. So lack of proper job in the militaries of their national countries lead them to take up these options elsewhere. And why does it happen? Perhaps the country they belong to had cut its military budget and the required personnel. Perhaps they are security paramilitary forces on a dictatorship, and since then has become a democratic country and employ much less armed personnel. So since the end of Cold War, this was very much noticeable. Perhaps they studied in military school and colleges in unrelated areas, and they decided to take up this role as well. So why choose to be a mercenary? Well, if someone wants to change its scenery and a chance to show their skills in combat, they might choose that option. And the military or the security, paramilitary unemployment, that happens in a lot of countries actually, lacks a proper job in the militaries of their national countries. Perhaps they belong to a country that has cut down its defense budget and required less personnel. Perhaps they are a security or a paramilitary forces on a dictatorship that since then has become a democratic country and employ less armed personnel. This is a pattern that started occurring after the Cold War across the world. And there could be other reasons such as money. While some wars pay better than the others, it's been said mercenaries might get somewhere between 3 to 15 times the money of a regular soldier makes for the job. Well, it's true, they lack benefits, they lack pension, they lack healthcare, the official recognition and honor, but many people don't care. Flexibility, well, work-life balance, right? So the mercenaries' work is also more flexible, allowing most of the times to discharge oneself at some points and choose a destination. Safety. Most ex-military even get civilian jobs and they hold on to a secure jobs after they get out of it. Then employ themselves for short times as mercenaries to boost their income simply because a large sum of money it's at play. Crime. Some countries offer lessened or discharge sentence commutations in exchange of social service under a mercenary contractor or even in some regular mercenary unit, such as the French Foreign Legion, that offers no less than a new identity and a French nationality to those serving with less crime records. And the other one would be around early and dishonorable discharge. That's a soldier's career ends prematurely because of a problem that makes basically impossible to be kept among the regular military. Ideological lure. This is important because it has, we have seen this happen in a lot of different places. Serve the Western or Russian or Chinese or Muslim values may make them some people to dedicate themselves to fight some war where the values are aligned and it's at stake. Perhaps they join a guerrilla or a paramilitary group in their own country or a neighboring ones. Because of this, are paid even large sums of money than a regular fighter. And once demobilized because the conflict ends or because of the other circumstances, they decide to move to a more regular careers on this. Since the vast majority of the mercs always serve the same side, they're often to keep the ideological alliance together with their business. So what if the mercenary is caught? Geneva Conventions don't recognize mercenaries as legitimate combatants. The trouble is that the definition of the mercenary is problematic. For instance, a soldier being paid by a non-legitimate party, such as a terrorist group or a drug cartel, is clearly not a combatant and would almost certainly be considered as mercenary. Here's the thing, a foreign fighter employed by a legitimate party, such as a sovereign state, would likely be considered a member of the state's armed forces and would be a legitimate combatant. So if arrested, mercenaries are not entitled to the status of prisoners of war. But the detaining power can decide to treat them according to this status. That can be prosecuted for being a mercenary only under the national law of the detaining power if it contains such provisions designating mercenarism as a distinct crime. they can be prosecuted for being a mercenary only under the national law of the detaining power if it contains such provision designating mercenarism as a distinct crime. So after seeing and hearing, you now need to see where we as Sri Lankans got involved in international conflict. In recent times, Sri Lankan mercenaries participated in the Russian and Ukraine war, has stirred many conversations locally and internationally. So why did some took this path? When Sri Lanka's economy crashed in 2022, people sought work abroad where they could land, including former soldiers who joined forces fighting in Ukraine after Russia's invasion. An unprecedented economic crisis in 2022 saw Sri Lanka run out of foreign exchange to import food, fuel, and other essentials, and ultimately default on its external debt. The mercenaries are recruited illegally by unregistered job agencies in Sri Lanka and enter via Poland and Georgia on tourist visa. The job agencies inform the former military personnel that they have to serve on the battleground. But for civilians, they're falsely told, however, they're being hired for the civilian jobs in Poland, Georgia, and Ukraine, but on arrival in Ukraine are sent to the front line. This now confirms us that there are untrained Sri Lankan civilians along with the ex-military involved in the conflict. According to the State Minister of Foreign Affairs, Taraka Balasuriya, large number of Sri Lankans had gone to Russia under tourist visa. The Sri Lankan mercenaries had joined Russian and Ukraine forces, according to Sri Lankan police. Here's the thing to note, the Sri Lankan mercenaries had joined Russian and Ukraine forces. Among them were a significant number of retired military personnel, and the number keeps changing every time. But from what I'm hearing, 16 retired military personnel have been killed in the ongoing Russian-Ukraine war. So what is the recent development in this space? Sri Lankan Parliament has set up an inquiry to track at least 2,000 battle-hardened Sri Lankans who reportedly enlisted on both sides of the war, including in the regular armed forces and mercenary groups. The government says about a dozen Sri Lankans are being held as prisoners of war in Ukraine, lured into combat by Russia's offer of salaries up to $3,000, and which is more than about 900,000 Sri Lankan rupees a month, and a Russian citizenship. A wife of a husband who is on this battleground has said that they have paid about $10,000 to the agency, for which they have mortgaged the house and sold the jewelries, etc. In the recent meetings with the Foreign Minister of Russia, Sergei Lavrov, and the Sri Lankan Foreign Minister Ali Sabri has brought this issue up. In this regard, a forthcoming meetings to be held on the 26th and the 27th of June in a couple of days between the Sri Lankan high-level delegation led by the State Minister of Foreign Affairs, Taraka Balasuriya, and the Deputy Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation will review these issues in detail and a more suitable action to be taken. On the request of the Minister, Ali Sabri, further recruitments are on hold. Those killed or injured are not insured and do not receive any compensation. The Sri Lankan government and its Foreign Employment Bureau washes their hands of any responsibility of them or the plight of their families, declaring that their actions are illegal. So, here is something to watch. While unemployment and desperate poverty compel those ex-soldiers and civilians to risk their lives in war zones in Ukraine and in Russia, the same social processes drove tens and thousands of rural youth to join the military during successive Sri Lankan government war against the LTTE. These youths were heroes who joined to save the motherland. Most were economic conscripts. They signed up to help their poverty-stricken families and believed that they would be financially compensated if killed or wounded. Thousands died, and there were 30,000 deserted during the conflict, some of them whom joined the criminal underworld or became hired killers for money. Will mercenaries in war jeopardize the mission for a nation? In the 21st century, private companies and employment agencies are playing with lucrative amounts of money, putting it as a bait to attract mercenaries to choose this over that. What if the mercenary decide to switch sides in the middle of the war as the other approaches with more in the materialistic gain? Very risky game, isn't it? If we believe war is the only way to solve disputes, now, will there be a place for mercenaries in the future wars? Time to tell. With that, I will leave you today and meet you in another episode of Goodness. Thank you.